Alright, in this video I'm going to talk about variables and data types, which are both very important concepts in programming. Let's start with variables. A variable is a name that you give into a part of your computer's memory of a specific size to be able to access that part. In Python, a variable's name can start with an underscore or an alphabet. The size of a variable depends on the type of the information, or to say it better, the data type you are storing in it. You don't really have to worry about the size of data types in Python, but you have to know what data types there are. So let's talk about data types. There are three kinds of numeric data types to store different kinds of numbers in Python. The first one is the int, which stores positive and negative integers. So if you write any positive or negative whole number in Python, it's going to be an integer. The second one is the float data type, which stores real numbers with a floating decimal point. Lastly, we have the complex data type, and it works exactly the way it does in math. We're not going to use this data type at first, but we'll get to it later on in the course. The next data type is the Boolean data type, which is called bool in Python. This data type can only have one of the two values, true and false. We'll use this data type a lot when we get to know the conditional statements and loops. The next data types are the sequence or collection data types. The first one is the string mentioned as str in Python, which is a collection of characters. The way to use them is putting any kind of text between single, double, or triple quotes. We've actually used this data type in the last video to print out our name, but we'll get to know it better in this one. The next data type is the list, which stores a collection of any data types available in Python. We can use the list by opening a bracket, typing in our data separated by comma, and then closing it. The items in a list don't have to be of the same type. The last data type I'm going to talk about in this video is the tuple, which is a lot like the list, but has less functionalities. I'll get to the differences later in the video. We'll also get to know the type function, which gives the data type of a value you give it. For 5 divided by 2, for example, this is going to say float, because this value is 2.5 and has a decimal point. Now that we've seen what data types are available in Python, let's use them and store some data using variables in live code. Alright, so I'm in PyCharm and I'm going to create a new project. For that, I'm going to click on File and New Project. And then I'm going to give the project a name. Let's call it Variables and Data Types. And then I'm going to hit Create. And it asks if I want to open that new project in a new window or in this window. I'm going to hit this window. And then I'm going to wait for it to create the project. Okay, the project is created, and I'm going to create a new Python file in the project and give it a name, call it variables and data types, and hit enter. And the first thing that we've talked about before were variables. In order to create a variable in Python, you're just going to write a name that your variable will be having, and that should only start with underscore or an alphabet. For now, I'm gonna give it the name number one. And keep in mind that the variable name can't have any spaces. It couldn't look like this. It has to be number 1, and I'm gonna put it equal to a number. Let's say 5. And that number is, of course, an integer. It doesn't have a decimal point. So the variable number 1 is going to reserve a place of my memory, of my computer's memory. And this is going to be an integer, and it's going to have the value 5 in it. And let's go ahead and just print the number 1 that we've just created. I'm going to type in number 1 as I typed in before correctly. And let's give it a run. Let's run it. And you will see that 5 is correctly printed here. So what happens if I say number plus 1? It should say 6, right? Number 1 is 5, plus 1 it's 6, so it should say 6. Let's run it again, and it says 6. Okay. So let's create another one. This one, let's call it number 2. Number 2. Now let it be equal to 5.0. Okay? And let's go ahead and type in number 2. Let's see what it prints out. It says 5.0. And we've also talked about the type function, which gives the type of a variable or any value that you give it. So let's put it in the print. We want to print the type. Okay, so we print the type of number 1, for example. Okay, and let's give it a run. And you will see that it says class int. Forget about the class for now, we'll get to that later. But the type of it is int, it's an integer. What about number 2? Let's try it with number 2. Give it a run, and it says class float. So the type of it is float. So what happens if I say number 1, the type of number 1 plus number 2? Number 2. Number 2 plus number 1. Like this. Okay. So number 1 plus number 2, it's 5.0 plus 5, it's going to be 10. But let's see what type it will have. It will have a float. So it automatically changed number 1 into a float. And let's print out just number 1 plus number 2. Let's see what happens. Print number 1 plus number 2. And give it a run. You will see that it says 10.0. And it works. So another functionality of Python with the types is that you can convert a type into another one if it's possible. Well, ints and floats are both numbers, so you can convert a float into an integer and an integer into a float. So let's create a number, let's call it, I don't know, let's comment all of this out for a minute. And for commenting, you just have to put a sharp at the first of any line, then the interpreter is not going to interpret that, it's going to ignore those lines. So we have that as a comment, so that chunk of code is not going to work anymore. So we're going to create a variable, let's call it number 3, and let it be equal to 5.5, okay? What I meant was that you can use the names of the data types as a function. For example, we can say int of, it's just like a function, like print, like type, like any other function. And you're in the inner side of it, you're gonna give number 3. Okay, and let's store that into another variable called number 4. Okay, so the number 4 is the integer of number 3. And let's go ahead and print number 4, right? Let's give it a run. And you will see that it says 5 because the 5.5, which is number 3, the integer part of it is only 5. It's going to print out exactly that. Okay, now number 4 is an integer, right? We can also take it and make a float out of it. So number 5 is going to be the float of number 4. Number must be capitalized because I wrote it capitalized right here. And let's go ahead and print out number 5. Give it a run. And it says 5.0. It just gave it an O, converting it into a float. So you can do that as well in Python. Let's comment that out as well. All right, the next thing that we've talked about were the Boolean data types. The Boolean data types are like, well, in the integer data types, you just wrote a value of it, right? 5 was, for example, integer, 5.0 was a value of float, and it's not that much different with Boolean either. The thing is that the Boolean data types have only 2 values. It's either true or false. And you will see that it actually changes the color of them. To let you know that those are special words, okay? So let's store that into another variable. For that, I'm gonna give it, I don't know, something like Boolean 1, right? Boolean 1 equals true. So my variable Boolean 1 is the type of Boolean, and it's going to be true. So true is going to be stored in Boolean 1. And false is going to be stored in Boolean 2, right? Too many O's there. Boolean 2, okay? So if I now print out, oh god, if I print out Boolean 1 and give it a run, it's going to say true. And if I print out Boolean 2, for example, it's going to say false. If I want to write the type of it, I just have to say, okay, print out for me the type of Boolean 1, right? The variable Boolean 1. And give it a run. It says it's bool. Okay? Now the thing with Boolean is that the bool of a number, for example, 0, is going to be true, right? So let's print it. Print the Boolean of 0. So we want to convert the number 0 into Boolean, and then we're going to print it. It's going to say false. But any other number, okay, any other number, for example 45, is going to be true. 1 is also true, right? The only number that will be converted into false as a Boolean is 0. If it's any other number, it's going to be true. So that was it about the Booleans. We don't really have that much about Booleans. And let's talk about strings. Well, strings are pretty easy. We have talked about them before, but let's now create a variable, call it name, and let's store our name in it. For that, I'm gonna have to put it into single quotes, or double quote, or triple quote. We'll talk about all of them. Single quote and say, for example, algorithm, right? And now if I print out name, and if I give it a run, it's going to say algorithm, right? If I change it into, I don't know, Python is cool, it's going to print out Python is cool. Now, where do you use this single code? Where do you use the double code? Where do you use the triple code? Right? The thing is, if you have to use this single quote character in your text, you have to put it in, pull the whole thing in double quotes, right? So let's say text1, it's a variable. We've created a variable, and let it be equal to double quotes, that's mine, right? So you see that we have actually used this character right in here. So in order for Python to be able to say where this string starts and where it ends, we have to put it in double quotes because we're using the single quote inside of it. And if we're using the double quotes somewhere in the middle, so let's say saying, I don't know, call it text2, and let's call it, well, we put in triple quotes, right? It's just, for that, you're just gonna have to press the single quote 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and it's gonna put it for you. PyCharm is gonna do that. And for that, you can say, saying, for example, I don't know, double quote, that double quote is not cool. And let's print all of them, print name, print text1, yeah, and also print text2. Now let's see what happens. Give it a run. It says Python is cool, that's mine, with that in it, with that character, with a single quote character in it, and it's gonna say saying that is not cool with the double quotes in it. So that's where you use the single, double, or triple quote for your strings. The next data type that we've talked about, let me comment this out for a moment. The next data type we've talked about was the list, right? Again, we create a variable, give it some name. I'm gonna give it list. Okay, list1 is equal to, we're gonna open the bracket and it closes it for us. And then we're gonna list any kind of data that we want, right? So let's say, for example, the first one is of the type Boolean, it's true, okay? Comma, and we're gonna move over to the next one. The next one is, for example, the number 5, okay? And the next one is a string, for example, it's algorithmy, right? Algorithmy, what did I do? Okay. So that's our list 1. And if I say go ahead and print list 1 for me and give it a run, it's gonna print out all the list. But what if I want to just print out the first one of it, or the second item in it, or the third item in it? I want to have to put a bracket in front of the name of the list, or the name of that variable that has the list in it, right? And then I'm going to just write in which element I want. Now keep in mind that this is element 0, this is element 1, this is element 2, right? You have to start counting at 0 when working with lists, okay? So I'm going to put in 0 right here. And it says true. Well, that's the first element, right? What if I say 1? It says 5. And if I say 2, it's going to say algorithmy. Now if I say -1, it's going to count the other way around. So starting from the end, -1 is algorithmy, -2 is 5, and -3 is true, right? There are also some kinds of things that you can do with the list. You can type in the name of your list, put a point here and say append if you want to append something into it. Let's say, for example, I want to add some other item into my list. I have created my list before and now I want to add some item into it. And then in those brackets, list.append, okay, list is list 1, of course, right? List1.append. And in there, I'm going to just give in what item it is that I want to add. For example, I want to add another string, right? I want to have to use the double quotes to tell the interpreter what I'm giving you is a string or a single quote. And then I'm going to give in some name. Let's say, for example, Python, right? So it's now added to the list. Let's print out the list again. Print out list 1. And you will see that Python is added in the end of it, right? So that's it for the list. Let me comment that out. And let's then work with tuples as the last thing that we're going to do in this video. Well, the tuple is a lot like the list. I'm going to just give it a name, give the variable a name, create a variable with a name, make it tuple1, right? Equal to some tuple. In order to create a tuple, you have to use the parentheses, not the brackets. If it's a bracket, it's going to be a list. You're going to use the parentheses, and it's pretty much like the list. Let's say true, I don't know, some number 89, and then some string, for example, I don't know, algorithmy, because what's a better name? Algorithmy, right? And another float, for example, 70.5, for example, right? And we can also print out this. Print tuple1 and give it a run. And you will see that it prints it out correctly. Again, we can access single parts of it with the brackets. You can say tuple at the index 0, right? Index 0 is true. And it says true. Let's say, for example, at index 3. It's going to be 70.5. The last one, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Let's try minus 2, for example. Minus 2 must be algorithmy. And it prints out algorithm correctly. So it's pretty much the same thing as the list, but it has less functionalities, if you remember, right? Let's just leave it with the tuple1 and go to the next line. And it has less functionalities. For example, it doesn't have that append functionality that we had before. For example, if you say tuple1.append, it's not gonna know what you're talking about because a tuple can't append anything, right? There are also ways to do that, but we'll talk about them later. Okay? You can also exchange the type between a list and a tuple. You can say, for example, the list, right, of tuple 1, and it's gonna convert the whole thing into a list, and you're gonna have to say where do you want to keep it, right? So you need a variable for that. Let's say list of tuple. I'm gonna give it that name, right? In order to be able to read that a little bit better, I'm gonna put underscores in between of those words so we can read it better. List of tuple. List of tuple is equal to list of tuple 1, right? And let's print out the list of tuple that we have just created. List of tuple. It's gonna know it for me. There's a that must not be there. Let's give it a run. You will see that we have the tuple, and then we have converted it into a list, and it's written down there. And let's go ahead and, I don't know, with the list right now, you have all the list functionalities, right? So you can go ahead and say list of tuple, right? List underscore of tuple dot append something into it, for example, the number 8, right? And 80, and then print out the list of tuple, right? And you will see that it has added 80 into the list of tuple that we had before, right? So that's pretty much it. We're gonna write our first program in the next video. So I'll see you there.